Hi, everyone. Welcome to Waste360's Nothing Wasted podcast. On every episode, we invite the most interesting people in waste, recycling, and organics to sit down with us and chat candidly about their thoughts, their work, this unique industry, and so much more. So thanks for listening and enjoy this episode. Hi, everyone. Hope you had a wonderful holiday and you're recharged and refreshed and ready to tackle 22. There's a lot that our industry has in store for us, as well as this podcast. So thanks to all of you for listening over the past couple of years. And I've really gotten a ton out of it. And right now you're going to listen to 9 of our top podcast guests and some of the advice that they distilled. I hope you get as much out of it as I did. I've learned so much from these fabulous leaders over the years. You're going to hear from Michael Hoffman from Stifel, Tara Hemmer from Waste Management, Vanguard, Renewables, Generate Capital. I just can't wait for you to listen and really get a ton out of it and hope it prepares you for a fabulous 22 ahead. Enjoy, and thanks again for listening, and we look forward to bringing you a lineup of guests that will make you think, give you a lay of the land for waste recycling, and of course, sustainability. So thanks for listening, and cheers to a happy and healthy 22 for all of us.
So what about the outlook for M&A?
Well, so we believe M&A reverts back to what I'm going to use the term normal course. What's that mean? So from 2000 to 2016, so pre-tax reform that was done in the prior administration, other than some obvious examples, the pace of M&A pretty much, or the industry consolidation, if you will, kept kind of pace with the underlying organic growth of the industry, 1% to 3%. And what do I mean by that? So the rate of change of the buyer's growth of sales. So if there's, they had 100 million of revenues, they're buying at 1% to 3%, you're buying $1 to $3 million, right? And that was sort of the underlying pace of the organic growth of the industry. And over that 15-ish year period, it's pretty much what you saw was that consolidation kind of absorbed the organic growth, with some obvious exceptions of Republic buying Allied and Connections buying Progressive. Tax reform comes, and it comes at a time when we're 8-9 years into a business cycle. You've clearly lowered personal tax rates. You've lowered capital gains, and you saw this acceleration. And our view is that known sellers who principally have one I call the 5Ds, and it leads with descendants, and then behind it it accelerates the pace of this is death, divorce, disability, or disease. So that you have your known, you don't have a succession issue or a succession opportunity, you're going to sell the business. And you pulled it forward because tax reform lowered capital gains, and you're sitting at 9 years into a business cycle. Statistically, business cycles last 7 years. So you're long in the tooth in the business cycle going, when the next cycle happens, are you likely you're going to get multiple compression and, I'm going to have a reduced level of profitability. So what do I get to sell the business for? I know I'm going to sell it, so you do it early. And you saw above average M&A 17, 18, 19, and theoretically we're going to in 20, and then the pandemic gets in the way. I think now we've had our business cycle, and we've not recovered to pre-pandemic levels of profitability yet. We're close, but not there yet. And so I think we settle into a more normal course.
It seems the world is realizing that systems and economies need to be less linear and more circular. And you've been doing this a long time in the waste industry and now with Generate. When did you start to see this becoming really tangible and something that we all need to work toward?
Well, look, I'm not going to suggest that, I was the first one, because I wasn't. There was a lot of activity going on, an effort to maybe more so, and I'll go back to the mid-2000s, early 2010s. There was a lot of focus on reuse, right? If you think about the recycling mantra of, reduce and reuse, there wasn't a whole lot of reduce. We were more focused on what can we do with the waste material once it's been generated. And then I think that first big transition was maybe even coming out of the 2008 economic crisis, when a lot of manufacturing companies and retailers started to realize that there was savings available to them by reducing the amount of either packaging that they were using or raw materials that they were using that would then turn into a waste product. And I think that was when we first started to see some of the big retailers, some of the big manufacturers start to change their practices, that not only became hyper-focused on what can we do with this waste material that we've generated in order to recover value from it, but can we reduce the amount of waste material that we're generating? And I think a lot of companies sort of got religion on that one and continue to strive for ways to reduce what they generate. And then you sort of got into maybe a little bit of a hypervigilance on, okay, we've taken as much material out of our process as we can today. There's still incremental improvements available to us, but we want to get a lot smarter now on what do we do with the material that we are generating that's a waste material. And frankly, a lot of it is packaging related. And I'm sure there are scraps from manufacturing processes that are not truly packaging, but when you think about materials that either go from primary or secondary packaging to a manufacturing enterprise, and then they're packaged, and then they show up at a retailer, and they're packaged to go to a retailer, and they're packaged to put on a shelf, and then they get to someone's house, and the first thing you do is remove and throw away the packaging. That's where I think there's been a lot of focus, is in the circularity of what folks are trying to do. There are a lot of things that you can reuse, and you see greater efforts to make things that are reusable, but there are still a lot of things that are, I'll call it consumables. And even those consumables can be reused. They just have to be processed in order to get them back to a point of reuse. And, that's where I'm talking about the fiber and the plastics and the metals, the things where in their current state, you can't really reuse them. You can't peel the shrink wrap off a pallet of material and reuse the shrink wrap, right? But you can take that shrink wrap and you can return it to a state where you can make another roll of shrink wrap out of it, or you can make some other product out of it. And right now we're just starting to see some of those technologies begin to reach commercial scale. And in particular, I'm talking about plastics conversion technologies, or even MSW conversion technologies. There are companies out there that have developed methodologies to take essentially the fiber and the plastic that's in MSW in one case, and turn that into either a fuel, transportation fuel, or another type of fuel. And then you've got the plastics conversion guys that are either taking those recycled plastics either to a product that allows you to make plastic from it, a naphtha or a synthetic crude oil that can then go back into a cracker where plastic can be made again, or in some cases, they're taking those plastic polymers and they're able to convert them back into the original monomer state. So if you take polystyrene, the material that's used to make packaging, that polystyrene, that styrofoam, which is the brand name for that product, one of the brand names for that product, you can take that and you can return that to a styrene oil, and that styrene oil that then can be used to basically, in a circular path, make polystyrene again. And so you really have a true circular solution for that type of product. And we're starting to see the companies that have been engaged in that get to the point where they're going to be able to operate at a scale level. I think we'll be seeing that over the course of the next year or so. There are already a couple that are in the process of building facilities. One big one, Pure Cycle, a company that uses a technology that was originally developed by Procter & Gamble that's going to convert polypropylene back to a pure propylene. They're building a big facility. And there are a number of other guys out there that are also looking at, they are invested in and are developing technologies that will allow them to convert other forms of plastic waste back into useful materials. So I think, when you look at it, my evolution sort of occurred as I became more familiar with the materials. I became more familiar with some of the technologies. I started to understand the collection processes. And, I'd say the biggest challenge that anyone who's trying to make something useful out of a product that has become a waste product is finding the feedstock in the quantities that you need in a form that you need. That's the biggest challenge. Is we in the U.S. We like to put all of our trash into the same bin, and that makes it easy for collection purposes, makes it easy for disposal purposes. But it makes it a little bit harder when you're trying to convert that material into something else, where ideally you'd want to segregate it. And, I think in some communities around the country, we're starting to move in that direction. I was talking about the source-separated organics in Toronto. I think we're going to start seeing that in some parts of the United States. I don't know that we're going to go back to multiple bins for plastics and metals and fiber as they do in some countries in Europe. But ultimately, when there's value associated with things, you can start to see behavior changes. And I think that's where we're headed now, is that there's a lot more interest in doing these things that allow us to be more sustainable, that reduce the amount of raw materials that we use, that reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, because it's not just the right thing to do, but because it's economically the right thing to do for us and for our communities.
Well, you mentioned servant leadership, and I know Waste Connections is very much into that leadership philosophy. There are other leadership philosophies. There's authentic leadership. There's like 7 or 8 grand leadership philosophies, and you guys have selected servant leadership. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to mention that, and if people haven't heard about that or had a chance to learn about that, let them know, and how Waste Connections decided on that particular
Sure.
route.
Well, one of your earlier questions was what folks do you think about that helped you along the way?
Mm-hmm.
Servant leadership is common sense. What can you do each and every day to help your employees, both professionally and at home?
Right.
It's a focus on the mind and the heart, right? It's a focus on, if you care for each other and if you can put the right relationships in place that a leader should have with the folks they have the privilege of leading, then you end up with fully empowered employees that don't have to be told what to do. They know innately what to do when no one's looking. Mm-hmm. It's revolutionary for folks outside of work because they take that common sense approach in caring for each other home. Yeah. And it's what you think the household ought to be too. And the letters we get from our employees who join us and look back on it, that I get, it's really transformed people's lives. But at the heart of it is knowing that if relationships drive results, what drives relationships? And this is not an kind of authoritarian or dictatorial leadership or managerial. It's you invert the pyramid, right? The higher up an organization you have, the more people you have above you to serve.
And then, John, can you describe the process of actually getting the food waste, collecting it, and then the path it takes to get to energy for the grid?
Sure. So food waste comes to us now in virtually every form. So it can come to us in a tanker directly from a factory. If someone is running a large-scale food process, we'll get dairy waste, cheese waste, any other. We've got ice cream in volume where it's the washout of the system. So if someone is cleaning out a system before they run a new flavor, that wash water and all of the excess product will come to us in tankers. We also get roll-offs in our system, so each farm is set up to accept anything that can come to it that isn't contaminated. So the farms are limited today, and we're kind of building a lot more capacity in there to pull out contaminants. But the farms mostly are taking clean materials. So we'll take clean liquids, clean solids, and we can accept both. So we've got strategies and mechanics of both so that we're able to take a roll-off, to take a compactor, to take a tanker at any of the farms. If a product is contaminated, so it's in packaging, it's frozen, it's in cans, all of that goes to the packaging center, and there, or what we call our organic recycling facility. And it's really an organic transfer station. And what we do there is separate mechanically. We remove, we squish and press the organics materials out of the packaging or separate it from the contaminants, if it's MSW or stuff like that. And then that material is stored at the site, put into tankers. We like to get it to kind of a semi-liquid, kind of oatmeal-y form, and that gets sent up to all the farms, where it's then put into large million-gallon tanks, which you can lovingly think of as a million-gallon stew pot. We raise the temperature up. We add manure from the farm in. The manure from the farm has wonderful, naturally occurring, the gut flora of the cow has these wonderful little bugs in it called methanogens. And those bugs love food waste. They're a lot like us. They love fats, oils, and greases. They love sugar and carbohydrates. They eat the food waste molecules, and they emit methane. We collect that methane in the headspace of these big tanks. We dry it, and then either use it to power a renewable electricity generator, so we can create renewable electricity on the site. We also then dry it and inject it into the natural gas grid so that we can actually now return renewable natural gas into the system. We then send those molecules off to our customers like Middlebury College or Unilever or Dairy Farmers of America, and they then get the wonderful benefit of negative. The incredibly cool thing about renewable natural gas, just as a little side, is that it's actually carbon negative. So solar and wind is carbon neutral, but because we're sequestering methane that would otherwise go into the atmosphere, we actually have carbon negative fuel, which is remarkable. That's the first of its kind in the renewables market. And so that does, it's a very powerful tool if you're looking to cut your carbon footprint at a facility. We then, when we're done taking the gas out of the food waste and the manure, we get this wonderful liquid fertilizer that's actually odor-free, which is, if anybody grew up next to a farm like I did, our downwind neighbors are really excited about every digester we build. And you get this, it's also quite potent. It is organic. And so unlike the synthetic fertilizers that most of our farm partners have been using over the past generations, they now have an organic fertilizer. So those food nutrients that were extracted from the soil to make food are now being returned to the soil. And that's the core of regenerative agriculture. And that's something that, again, we didn't really understand how important and powerful that would be when we started the company, but it's something that has become really critical to our mission and something that's very, very important to all of our corporate partners because I think they're all looking to reconnect with American agriculture and the American farmer. And this is something where, again, it was unexpected and unanticipated how strong and important that product would be as part of the process. But it's been really exciting for us. And so we give that low carbon fertilizer to our host farmers and all of his neighbors. We also extract the dry solid material and give that back to the farm for bedding for the animals or for composting, and also extremely effective for them. So lots of moving pieces. You need a little scorecard to keep track of all the different critical interactions there, but it's a really different model for food manufacturers and American farmers to work together to change the way that we've been doing it. Instead of running kind of parallel, they now run in this wonderful circle.
I mean, you touched on it a little bit here because it makes sense with waste to energy. But there is an increased focus here too, whether it's on policy or consumer interest. And you guys really seem positioned to expand in the waste to energy world as well. How do you plan on doing that, or what are you working on now around that?
Well, our team has been on the energy journey for many, many years. And, one thing that I'm really proud of is if you look at our traditional landfill gas to energy portfolio, which is historically where we collected landfill gas and converted it to electricity, we generate over 5 times more energy through that than we consume at WM. And that's huge. So we're able to help other companies with their renewable energy goals, certainly in the electricity space. In the renewable natural gas space, which is emerging, we were really an early leader here. If you go back about 5 or 6 years, we built our first plant at our Milam facility in St. Louis. And this is a great story because we generate landfill gas. We're able to then convert that landfill gas into renewable natural gas that can be used as a transportation fuel. And because WM operates the largest compressed natural gas fleet in North America, we're able to close the loop and use that fuel in our trucks. And so over the last several years, we've made pretty significant investments in renewable natural gas facilities, close to 100 million, and that number is continuing to grow as we look at evaluating an additional 20 plants within our portfolio. And then beyond that, we do have some existing partnerships where other entities have built facilities at our other landfills. So an example of that is in Houston, Texas, at Atascocita, where we have a third-party partner there that built a renewable natural gas facility. And so we have roughly another 14 of those that help drive that renewable energy circular economy. And one thing that I'm really proud of, if you look at our 2025 goals and the report that we just issued, we had a 2025 goal to have basically 50% of our fleet, our compressed natural gas vehicle fleet, run on renewable natural gas. And we actually exceeded that goal in 2020. We have 55% of our CNG trucks are powered by RNG. So this is a great example of a circular story involving our landfills and our fleet as a whole.
What do you think about the world paying closer attention to plastics these days?
Well, it's a catch-22, right? Because for so long, no one listened to us. And now everybody's paying attention, and they're coming up with a bunch of wacky ideas out there, right? I mean, so I think that the challenge is to try and drive that discussion toward solutions that actually will impact the material. And the decisions are made, with some databases and some rationality behind them. I'll give you an example. We see a lot of policy drivers now calling out, well, we want, all packaging to have a 50% recycling rate by 2025 and, 70% recycled content by 2030 or something along those lines. What we do is, we provide the data. For instance, in California last year, there was a recycled content bill for beverage containers. And, they had a 25% content requirement by 2025, and then they had a 35% a couple years after that, and a 50% a couple of years after that. And we did the analysis, and we told them, look, the industry may be able to get you to 25% by 2025, but after that, you're just wishful thinking. And they were like, well, industry will respond. They always respond. I said, no, you don't understand. There's nothing for industry to respond with. You don't have the infrastructure. You're not collecting enough material right now in order for us to do and to be able to process anything more than 25%. And you try and educate people in terms of, say, the system itself. One of the analogies I like to use, asking, say, the waste management industry to deal with today's packaging is like asking a 1978 Chevy Chevette to meet current California emission standards. You know this better than I. The packaging stream has evolved and changed dramatically over the last 8 to 10 years, right? How do we get all our packages for Christmas and gifts for Christmas, what have you? And, there's a lot there that the system needs help with, and we can't continue to do the same thing. People talk about recycling like it's its own thing, but recycling is a component of a system that includes, are we putting the right things in the bin, number one? Is it labeled properly? All right? There's a lot of mislabeling out there in terms of what's recyclable and what's not. And is it being sorted properly? I mean, does the MRF have the ability to identify packaging and sort it properly? And then after that, is it being sorted properly for the recycler? So, recycling per se, the processing is only one step in the entire system. And people just want to go to, well, it needs to be recycled at a certain rate. Well, you're going to change the entire system in order for us to do that. And, that's a longer term issue. And unfortunately, in this environment, people are just like, yeah, we'll just ban it. Well, I like to say, you're never going to ban your way out of plastics packaging. So you need to create sustainability solutions for it. And I think that's really where the dialogue needs to go right now, because there's a lot of policy out there, as well-intentioned as it may be. What you don't want to have happen is for this attention from a policy perspective, after 30 years of no attention, they enact something, and then they move on to the next big issue, but it doesn't solve the problem. We want to make sure it solves the problem. And, we can't keep doing what we've been doing and expect a different result. So, those are the big things that we look at and try and solve that. Not everybody agrees, right? I mean, again, that's something that you certainly know. I mean, you've seen a lot of legislative proposals that would require participation either from, say, the virgin resin manufacturers who are at the start of the chain here, or at the end of the chain with consumer brand companies, having some sort of shared responsibility or stewardship for the packaging they put in the marketplace. And that always creates a conflict, right? But it certainly seems that the trend line is moving that way from a policy perspective. And I think that's a recognition that we have to do something different than what we've done in the past.
You mentioned EPR in addressing the issue of plastic waste, and I know the U.S. struggles with that a bit, and we look to Europe and Asia and even Canada for good examples of this. How important do you think this is now?
I think there is quite strong alignment from, I would say the most progressive groups to even some of the more conservative ones that EPR in some form will be a key element of a national legislative system in the U.S. in order for the systems change that we need, right? I think what's really exciting is where EPR traditionally talks about just a funding mechanism. What is being discussed these days in sort of that larger set of diverse stakeholders is not just the funding mechanism, but how does policy enable the ultimate system that we're looking to see, right? We want a system where no matter where you are in the U.S., you have a blue bin. And it's really easy for you to put things in that blue bin because there's no sort of decoder ring required. It either goes in the blue bin or it doesn't. And everybody's blue bins has the same things that go in it, right? And so then you have these facilities that these blue bins are collected and sent to that all have the right sorting and processing technologies to be able to manage those materials that go in the blue bin. And therefore, on the back end of that, you have these really high quality secondary markets to be sourced from. And so to do that, right, you need to have policies that enable all of those points, whether it's around the design considerations, the access and consumer engagement, the infrastructure and funding for that, or even the enabling of the secondary markets. Those we want to have a much more complete and holistic policy plan that's out there. And so that's where the discussion is, where EPR is a key piece of that, but it's sort of beyond just EPR, if that makes sense.
And so, Daniel, you were really ahead of your time. I mean, with pursuing sustainable fashion in general and then everything that you've rolled out since. Do you think that the drive toward a more sustainable fashion industry is real right now and it's not greenwashing? Do you think it's hit a tipping point?
I think the only part of it that hasn't hit the tipping point is the actual industry. I think that the consumer is ready to tip the scales, and what we're seeing more and more in the annual reports that come out, the trend reports, but also the financial reports, show that consumers are ready for sustainable goods and that market share is being diverted away from larger and larger brands and into one-of-a-kind handmade goods. We're seeing all of these incredible, inspiring designers come up on platforms like Instagram and TikTok. We're seeing all kinds of exciting personalities that are emerging as part of the makers revolution. And so I think that the consumer is really ready. I don't think the industry is quite caught up yet, but I don't know that they'll catch up in time. I think that this new industry is sort of burgeoning in a very exciting way. I tried to explain this to someone last year. I was very affected by the closing of Barney's. It was just something I couldn't fathom. This New York institution that I aspired to sell to was out of money. How is that possible? And what I explained to a friend of mine, I said, let's just forget about the real numbers for a second. Let's say that 4 small brands, Zero Waste Daniel and 3 other brands, who cares, each made $250,000. That's $1 million. So if 10 small brands do the same and then 100 small brands do the same, that puts a giant like Barney's out of business. All of that market share is going directly into those people's pockets. And with platforms like Etsy and, all of these ways of communicating directly with makers increase in visibility and popularity, old school ways of doing things shut down. So I think that the consumer is really who's in the driver's seat right now. And, I don't know if the industry will catch up or shut down.
So tell me, what type of materials are working well in considering the full value chain and end of life?
Oh, that's a great question. And that question that's a challenging one to answer because it's really application specific. What I mean by that, and so I'm in the world of consumer packaged goods, and there's many different packaging formats. You can kind of classify them into 2 main schools of thought, rigids and flexibles. Right now, in the world of flexibles, they're made out of a lot of different materials, but you might see a PET laminated to low-density polyethylene and aluminum. That's the conventional structure, but that, although a beautiful engineered structure in its performance, it does not have a good end of life situation, and that's why we've spent a lot of work innovating that space. But in the rigids, you do see a lot of plastics in the space, PET, polypropylene. Those two plastics do have stronger end markets, but still not very strong and not strong enough end markets, in my personal opinion, based on the material flow, and you think about it as like a mass balance equation. So glass is an interesting one as well. We love glass from a product design standpoint because it really it's a beautiful material. It is recyclable, and it doesn't leach, and so a lot of people and brands like to use that material. But as you know, the recycling story is a challenging one because it's all based on end markets, and it's all based on local end markets. So there's a lot of work to do from a product design standpoint and also an infrastructure standpoint, and opportunities for us to work together to make sure that the products that we're putting into the world have local end markets that can receive that and actually want that material. So that's something we can talk a little bit more about, but that's it's a challenging question to answer because definitely really based on what performance you're looking for and what type of packaging you need from a brand side.
Thank you for listening. It would mean the world if you would take a moment to rate or review this podcast. And if you share it with us on one of our social networks, we are giving out some fun Nothing Wasted podcast swag. So just tag us and see what you get. Thanks so much.